Wait for 1 minute.
Distinguished delegates, I would like to call the meeting to order. I invite delegates to take their seats, please. Delegates, please take your seats. Distinguished delegates, please take your seats. I would like to call the meeting to order, please. Distinguished delegates, please take your seats, please. Distinguished delegates, welcome back. I hope you had a sumptuous lunch. We will now finish the consideration of sub-item 4A, resource mobilization. We will then take up sub-item 4B, please. Before we start, I would like to strongly impress on all delegates the importance of speaking slowly when you deliver your interventions. It is impossible for the interpreters to provide interpretation if you speak rapidly. And if they are unable to provide interpretation, this defeats the whole point of conducting this intergovernmental meeting in a formal setting with interpretation across the 6 official languages of the UN. Therefore, I implore you all to speak at a reasonable speed. If this is ignored, I may have to interrupt you to speak slowly. In addition, I would like to again call on speakers to please upload your statements in advance of the taking floor. If for some reason you are unable to do this, the statements must be uploaded within 1 hour of the close of plenary. Statements uploaded late may not be included in the conference room papers and non-papers under preparation for further consideration. Your understanding in this regard is greatly appreciated. IPLCs, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. The IFB recognizes the efforts to align the draft resource mobilization strategy with the whole of government and whole of society approach in line with the target 19F of the KMGBF. Additionally, the IFB especially appreciates Section 5 in Annex 2 of the contributions of indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth. It recommends retaining the text with minor changes in mechanisms that respect their rights and safeguards. On 4B, financial mechanisms, we acknowledge the recent development in GEF policies, including 20% aspiration programming under the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund to support indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth. In line with this, we call for strengthening the GBFF and other biodiversity financial mechanisms through partnership with indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth in their design and delivery, recognizing the challenges in accessing funding that have been highlighted for many years. IFB proposes the following text additions. For agenda item 4A, in document CBD-SBI-04/5, section 5 of the Annex 2, in paragraph 5C, we propose to add lands, waters, and before territories. In paragraph 5D, we propose to add after schemes with environmental and social safeguards, and after management to add while respecting their rights. For agenda item 4B, in document CBD/SBI/4/6, we propose the following text additions. Under section on Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, we propose to add paragraph 10b, which will read, acknowledging the aspirational programming share of 20% by 2030.
IPLCs, may I intervene, please? Sorry, may I intervene, please? We are yet to complete the 4A with these groups. So you are mentioning 4B repeatedly. That's why I had to intervene. Can you come after some time, or if you want to speak on 4A, welcome, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have submitted this in writing, so we ask parties for their support. Thank you.
Thank you for your understanding and cooperation. With others, I mean to say in the line CBD, Women's Caucus, Youth, and other NGOs whom I going to call, give the floor. Please, we have given this 4A only. You are expected to speak now. Once you complete this, we will be moving on to 4B, please. CBD Women's Caucus.
Thank you, Chair. I am with the Global Forest Coalition, representing the CBD Women's Caucus. We urge parties to ensure that any COP decision this SBI recommends translates into a solid, legally binding basis for the mobilization of resources that conserve rather than destroy biodiversity as a fundamental element to ensure gender-responsive biodiversity finance plans and efficiency in the process. We reject voluntary corporate-driven initiatives to align all financial flows, including private investments, with the GBF and its gender plan of action. We need to genuinely address the impacts of destructive public and private investments and other financial flows instead of relying on flow corporate-driven reporting initiatives, which only monitors financial risks, lacking transparent reporting on actual or potential impacts to nature and human rights. The CBD Women's Caucus rejects biodiversity and carbon offsets, including nature-based solutions and other forms of corporate finance that would undermine the adopted human rights and gender-responsive approaches. We also call to add stronger language that translates into binding regulations to redirect perverse incentives and mobilize the necessary resources, the full respect to free, prior, and informed consent, as well as social and environmental safeguards. We suggest the following additions to the document CBD SBI-04-5, for which we would like the Chair to ask party support. In the annex, after recommendation 4, add the following paragraph, noting the urgent need to support gender-responsive implementation of the KMGBF, ensure adequate and sufficient funds to implement the gender plan of action. In Annex 1, in the revised strategy for resource mobilization, Section 3, objectives and actions, Paragraph 1, new and additional resources, H, add and increasing after enhancing, and add women and youth after local communities. In Annex 2, remove the word voluntary from all the actions of the non-exhaustive list. In Annex 2, Sections 2 and 3, international and domestic biodiversity finance, add a new subpara that reads, creating or enhancing mechanisms for direct access to funding by indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. We would like the Chair to ask party support for our text proposals. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, CBD Women's Caucus. May I now request parties, if those who want to support the amendments changes proposed by CBD Women's Caucus, please raise your hands. Yeah, okay. Colombia. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Youth, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We welcome the work of the Advisory Committee on Resource Mobilization and their findings, including Annex 2 and 3. We express our appreciation for the statements made by Egypt, Colombia, Fiji, Mexico, among others. Resource mobilization is a key to the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. However, innovative financial mechanisms, private finance, and market-based approaches are being developed and scaled up despite evidence indicating their low or limited contributions to nature, in contrast to their negative impacts on human rights and biodiversity. In this sense, social and environmental safeguards and applying a human right-based approach is urgent. On the other hand, indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth, as stewards of the earth, address biodiversity conservation and restoration and justice in their diverse socio-ecological realities. Despite this recognition, the current resource mobilization strategy is still insufficient to guarantee plans and actions focused on equitable, inclusive, effective, and gender and youth responsive representation and participation in decision-making and access to financial resources. We therefore recommend the following. On the draft recommendations, add a new paragraph 7 bis that reads, urges parties, the private sector, financial institutions, and multilateral development banks to put in place and enforce social and environmental safeguards and apply a human right-based approach in developing or scaling up biodiversity finance instruments, in particular for innovative schemes in line with COP decisions 12/3 and 14/15 on guidelines for safeguards and biodiversity finance mechanisms. Also add a new paragraph 11 bis that reads, recognize that the important roles and contributions of indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth to the implementation of the Common Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework receive relatively little finance and often lack directly access to biodiversity finance, and that parties and relevant stakeholders need to facilitate access to and increase financial resources for right holders. In paragraph 8, add indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth after parties, and on Annex 2, paragraph 5d, delete the sentence such as biodiversity credit schemes. We kindly ask the parties to support this intervention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, youth. May I now request parties, if they want to support the changes, amendments, please raise your hands. Okay. One. One person. Yeah. Colombia also. Colombia. Comoros. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I will now take NGO at microphone 236. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm from the Third World Network, speaking on behalf of the CBD Alliance. The issue of resource mobilization is critical to the implementation of the Convention and the GBF. Biodiversity loss continues apace as financial resources are not provided or used to destroy rather than conserve biodiversity. Structural root causes are not addressed, and there is misplaced hope on the private sector and markets. There needs to be equity, as for far too long, obligations under Article 20 have not been met. We stand with developing countries, where most of the world's biodiversity lies, that are calling for a dedicated global biodiversity fund under the authority of the COP to be established, one with equitable governance and directly accessible and responsive to their needs, and also to the needs of indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth, those who are the best stewards of biodiversity. In this regard, financial and political support should be scaled up for collective actions, Mother Earth-centric actions, and non-market-based approaches in accordance with Target 19F. At the same time, our message is clear. Stop financing biodiversity harmful activities. Trillions are going into harmful subsidies and incentives for harmful sectors like industrial livestock farming and bioenergy, while the private sector invests $5 trillion annually in destroying nature. corporate-led voluntary approaches like the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures undermine the GBF. References to such approaches should be removed, as suggested by Egypt. Strong regulatory frameworks and binding commitments to redirect incentives should be included in NBSAPs. The international financial and monetary system further pushes developing countries to support extractive activities that drive biodiversity loss in order to maintain financial stability, attract investment, and obtain foreign currency, often to service external debt. We thus need to urgently address structural constraints on developing countries by ensuring debt and tax justice. Countries in debt distress spend more on servicing debt than on education or health, let alone biodiversity protection. But debt for nature swaps have limited impact on debt levels, paying only 0.11% of total debt of low and middle income countries over 3 decades. Their environmental and social impact is also questionable, and it is unethical to see debt distress as an opportunity for conservation. Private and blended finance, market-based mechanisms not only fail to generate the resources and biodiversity outcomes required, but have adverse impacts on indigenous peoples, women, and local communities. The same concerns arise with the revived interest in biodiversity offsets and credits. We suggest, in paragraph 6, add after review, including an assessment of the impacts on biodiversity and human rights. We agree with the proposal by the EU, China, and Egypt for a new paragraph requesting further studies, in particular on safeguards, grievance mechanisms for financial instruments, and sovereign debt implications for CBD implementation. We don't have time to read out the full proposal, but the studies are highlighted in paragraph 35 of the report of the Advisory Committee on Resource Mobilization. Finally, in paragraph 25D of Annex 2, delete such as biodiversity credit schemes. We will submit details in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The suggestions, amendments, or changes made by TWN, Third World Network, if there is any support, please raise your hands. Parties, request parties. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. I now invite NGO at microphone number 229, please. 229.
Thank you, Chair. This statement is on behalf of a coalition of civil society organizations, including the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, Greenpeace International, BirdLife International, Campaign for Nature, Conservation International, and WWF. We see resource mobilization as absolutely critical to ensure the successful implementation of the historic KM-GBF agreed at COP15. To that end, and on the occasion of International Day of Biological Diversity, we are launching today a global campaign called 20 Billion by 25 for Nature. The goal of our campaign is to ensure that the commitment in Target 19A for developed countries to provide at least $20 billion of biodiversity finance to developing countries annually is met by 2025, and that there is momentum to achieve at least $30 billion annually by 2030. Our organizations call on developed countries and countries that voluntarily assume obligations of developed country parties to urgently accelerate efforts to increase finance to developing countries to meet the at least 20 billion target by 2025. And we call on developed country ministers of environment and finance to urgently launch an international ministerial working group to achieve Target 19A. Our organizations are prioritizing this campaign because the successful implementation of the GBF will depend on whether the world meets its financing targets. This 2025 target will be a first test. Developing countries host much of the world's most important biodiversity and will bear the disproportionate part of the responsibility and costs of delivering key goals of the GBF. Indigenous peoples conserve a significant percentage of the world's remaining biodiversity, which makes it critical that developed countries also support direct access to fund indigenous peoples and local communities to achieve target 19F. And developed countries have a historic and pragmatic responsibility to provide increased support to developing countries. Finally, we recommend the following change to CBD-SBI-04/5, Annex 1, Section A. Under new and additional resources to add urgently before the text that reads increasing, enhancing and broadening total biodiversity and so on, and to add at the bottom of this section of new and additional resources a subsection I, which will read establishing an international working group of developed country ministers of environment and finance to achieve target 19A. We've submitted these changes in writing and kindly request support from parties in the room. Thank you very much, Chair.
May I request parties, if there is any support, please, may I see the Sierra Leone? Am I correct? My eyesight is a little poor. Yeah. Gambia. Cameroon. Gabon. Guinea. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Because yeah. Friends, Democratic Republic of Congo, you have asked for the floor. You have the floor, please.
Oui, merci, monsieur.
Yes, thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. And sorry for taking the floor. I asked for it a bit earlier. It seems that you haven't asked countries to support the statement made by the indigenous peoples and local communities. And DRC would just like to emphasize that it does support that statement made by the indigenous peoples and local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you very much. Friends, I have a list of 5 remaining risks from the observers. This is the list, and I will not be extending or going beyond this list, please. Now, IUCN, you have the floor, please.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Chair. IUCN supports updating and strengthening the resource mobilization strategy to fully align it with the GBF. We welcome the establishment of the GBF Fund, the commitment of various countries to provide more than $200 million for the first tranche of its programming, and the proposal to allocate 20% of funds to indigenous peoples. We urge all countries to support greater funding for the fund. IUCN emphasizes the need to increase financing for biodiversity from all sources and notes that we urgently need a comprehensive economic approach to incorporate biodiversity in all economic decision-making to implement the GBF. Chair, although the IUCN welcomes the recent positive trends in financing for biodiversity, we recognize the need for a substantial increase if we are going to achieve that set out in Target 19. IUCN also asks for intensification of efforts in order to implement Target 18. These two targets are inseparable. Chair, we are concerned by what we heard in plenary session this morning. The positions of the regional groups and countries continue to be very polarized, without this necessarily being a reflection of the excellent work of the Advisory Committee and the proposals included in document SBI-04. We call on everyone to close this gap in order to achieve commitments which enable us to move forwards on this topic in a significant and effective manner. This progress cannot be delayed further, and we hope to see tangible decisions made at COP16 in Cali. I like to say that Cali is the capital of salsa. Thank you.
Thank you, IUCN. We have the following list: UNDP, then ITPGRFA, OHCHR, UNODC. UNDP, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Distinguished delegates, United Nations Development Programme acknowledges the critical support provided to parties by the GEF to design national biodiversity finance plans. UNDP, through BioFin and supported by donors, has been supporting 41 countries to implement biodiversity finance plans with significant and institutionalized policy and finance results. The program has to date unlocked more than $1 billion for nature finance, 95% from domestic finance mechanisms, and many are recurring annually. This has been the result of setting up a variety of domestic policy and finance mechanisms for long-term sustained results. One example is the Malaysia Ecological Fiscal Transfer. This mechanism has channeled $87 million from the federal government to subnational governments for nature conservation and will continue to provide much needed finance every year. In addition, many countries are looking at identification and repurposing of nature negative subsidies. Biodiversity finance work is changing the perception of stakeholders. It is increasingly no longer viewed as only the responsibility of the Environment Ministry, but something which every line ministry has a stake in financing. Under the new GEF umbrella program to support development of biodiversity finance plans, we are now supporting an additional 91 countries in designing finance plans to reach their national targets aligned to the biodiversity plan. Regional inception workshops have been completed, and we are encouraged by high levels of interest from the parties. We are accelerating our support in the coming months so that countries can show tangible initial progress by COP16 as part of our contribution to generate crucial long-term biodiversity finance for a future in harmony with nature. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, UNDP. ITPGRFA. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address this session on behalf of the International Treaty on this agenda item. Chair, distinguished delegates, the Secretariat of the International Treaty has participated actively in the meetings of the Advisory Committee on Resource Mobilization in our capacity as a committee member. We have appreciated the opportunity to follow and contribute to the committee's discussions and developments, particularly given the strong synergies between the work of this group and a number of the treaty's own current processes. In particular, these include the implementation of the treaty's funding strategy, which includes the development and testing of a methodology for measuring non-monetary benefit sharing, and the enhancement of the functioning of the treaty's multilateral system of access and benefit sharing, which includes areas for further work on DSI, GSD, a payment structure, and rates. In November 2023, the treaty's governing body decided to extend out the timeline of the treaty's funding strategy by 2 years to 2027 to enable the treaty to build upon the opportunities and momentum arising from the recent adoption of the GBF, and to enable the treaty's funding committee to support the finalization of the process for the enhancement of the multilateral system. The objective of the funding strategy is to ensure that sufficient financial resources are mobilized in the area of agricultural biodiversity through a wide range of channels in order to support the international treaty in a long-term, coordinated and effective way. The treaty's funding committee is working on innovative funding for agricultural biodiversity, including by involving key stakeholders within the food system, such as the seed sector and food processing industries. Mobilization of domestic resources remains critical, including to enhance integration of plant diversity in national development plans and budgets. In 2023, the governing body invited contracting parties to mainstream the implementation of the international treaty within NBSUPs and other relevant policies, plans, and programs to support GBF implementation. With these areas of alignment in mind, we welcome the improvements made to the biodiversity landscape study and to the resource mobilization strategy relating to reinforcing synergies with other international funding mechanisms and strategies of biodiversity-related conventions. Similarly, we support the draft recommendation of the Advisory Committee provided through document 4/5 under Resource Mobilization Strategy in paragraph 5 that acknowledges that other global biodiversity-related conventions and multilateral agreements have also adopted strategies for resource mobilization and encourages increased cooperation and synergies in their implementation. We look forward to continuing to work closely with the CBD Secretariat and the Advisory Committee to promote and harness synergies among our respective processes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, ITPG-RFA. Now, OHCHR, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Currently, the draft decision of the Conference of the Parties included in document SBI-04/5 concerning resource mobilization omits Section C of the KMGBF, which guides the implementation of the entire KMGBF and sets out that the KMGBF's implementation should follow a human rights-based approach. This means that also the implementation of Goal D should be consistent with Section C, including following a human rights-based approach. It should also comply with international human rights law. For these reasons, OHCHR proposes adding the following preambular paragraph 3 to the draft COP decision. Quote, recalling that the implementation of all the goals and targets of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework should follow a human rights-based approach. Second, for the same reasons, OHCHR proposes changes to paragraph 6 of the revised strategy for resource mobilization included in Annex 1. Currently, the revised strategy requires the identification and elimination, phasing out, or reform of financial resource flows biodiversity-related financial flows that cause harm. It should be clarified that financial flows to protect biodiversity should be human rights enhancing, protecting people and the planet. To be aligned with Section C of the KMGBF and international human rights law, The strategy should require that biodiversity-related financial flows not only do not cause harm, but also follow a human rights-based approach, respecting, protecting, and fulfilling human rights. Further, the responsibility of businesses to respect human rights, described in the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, should be explicitly referenced. We will submit our specific proposals in writing and would be grateful for the parties' support. Thank you.
Thank you, OHCHR. Now I keep the floor open for any party to support the changes, amendments proposed by OHCHR. Colombia. I could not see that plate. He's raising the hand. What is Suriname? Is it Suriname, please? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. UNODC, you have the floor, please. Okay, no response. Thank you. Thank you, friends. That completes our list of speakers. We have now reached the conclusion of our discussions on item 4A, that is on resource mobilization. Thank you for all your excellent contributions to the discussions. It is clear that further discussions are needed on the recommendation of the draft decision of the conference of the parties. I will therefore establish a contact group under this agenda item. The contact group will be co-chaired by Shonisani Munjadi of South Africa and Salima Kempanir of Belgium. I will prepare a non-paper with the co-chair for the co-chairs with the co-chairs. The mandate of the contact group will be to address contentious issues and provide clean text for CRP. The contact group will hold its first meeting tomorrow evening from 7:30 to 10:30 p.m. and the Secretariat will announce the room number shortly. Colleagues, let us now move to item 4B on the financial mechanism. I will first ask the Secretariat to introduce the documents. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. On the agenda item 4B, the Secretariat has prepared the document CBD-SBI-04/6 on financial mechanism, and also has made available a document from Global Environment Facility entitled Preliminary Report of the Council of the Global Environment Facility. That's the document 4/6/8-1. These working documents are supported by 5 information documents you can see on the screen. Information number 12 related to the GF preliminary report. Information number 16 related to funding needs assessment. Information number 17 related to 6 quadrennial review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism. information number 18 related to four-year outcome-oriented framework of program priorities for GEF 9. Information number 19 related to programmatic synergies among the biodiversity-related conventions. The subsidiary body is expected to develop recommendation regarding guidance to the financial mechanism, that's a global environment facility, including a four-year outcome-oriented framework of program priorities for GEF 9, report of the GEF Council, determination of funding needs under the financial mechanism for GEF 9, and the sixth review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat, for that introduction. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Sam Johnston, the independent evaluator for the sixth review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism, to say a few words of introduction. Mr. Johnston, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This review is especially important because it's the first time the COP has had the opportunity to review the financial mechanism after the adoption of the GBF, and because a review process is an important element of the proper governance of the financial mechanism. The process for undertaking the review is contained in InfDoc 17, as Yubin just said, which follows the objectives, methodology and criteria determined by the COP in its decision 15/15. The review will include the following steps: structured interviews with parties to the Convention and its protocols and other stakeholders here at this meeting, a desk study of key documents, a portfolio analysis of the biodiversity portfolio with the GEF, an online questionnaire to be published shortly after this meeting, interviews with parties online, interviews with the Secretariat, the GEF Secretariat, the GEF Independent Evaluation Office and other various GEF agencies and stakeholders. And the information compiled from these steps will then be used to draft a report that will be submitted to the Secretariat for comment, then to the GEF Secretariat for its comment, and then a final report containing recommendations, responses to the comments to be submitted to the Secretariat for consideration by the COP. Mr. Chair, my goal at this meeting is to conduct as many interviews as possible. The questions for the structured interview are in InfDoc 17. If you wish to participate in an interview here at this meeting, please contact me either through the Secretariat or approach me directly and we can find a mutually convenient time for the interview. I recognise that some parties may not have all the right people here or indeed the time for this interview, so I'll also be available for online interviews after this meeting. Furthermore, responding to the online questionnaire will be the primary means for collecting views for this review. Mr. Chair and distinguished delegates, I look forward to working with you all to make this review useful for the COP, improve the effectiveness of the financial mechanism, and contribute to developing an evaluation process for the Convention's financial mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnston. And now, before I open the floor, I would like to invite representative of the Global Environment Facility to introduce its preliminary report to COP16. Mr. Mark Zimsky, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are pleased to introduce the draft Jeff report to the 16th Conference of the Parties to the CBD-SBI-04/6/add1. This draft report provides information on the activities of the GEF in the biodiversity focal area in response to COP15 guidance received in December 2022. The report covers the last 6 months of GEF 7 and the first 20 months of GEF 8 from January 1, 2022 to February 29, 2024. During the first 20 months of GEF 8, the GEF provided $2 billion in direct programming contributions to the KM-GBF from all GEF programming lines. These resources leveraged an additional $13.9 billion in co-financing, representing a co-financing ratio of $6.9 to each GEF dollar. For GEF 8, which spans the period from 2022 to 2026, biodiversity continues to be the largest GEF focal area with an allocation of $1.9 billion. Of this, $1.2 billion has already been programmed, benefiting 141 countries. In other words, even though we are only 42% of the way through GEF 8, 60% of biodiversity resources have been programmed, demonstrating timeliness and efficiency by the entire GEF partnership. Section 5 of the report provides a summary of GEF's response to COP15 guidance. Among the key COP decisions, COP15 requested the GEF to establish a dedicated and accessible global biodiversity framework fund. 6 months after the COP, at the very next GEF Council meeting in June 2023, the GBFF was established and its programming directions were approved, including the introduction of a revised and shortened project cycle. The 7th GEF Assembly ratified the GBFF establishment decision in August 2024, and the first GBFF Council adopted several decisions to operationalize the fund in February 2024. To date, the GBFF has received approximately $225 million in pledges from 6 countries: Canada, Germany, Japan, Luxembourg, Spain, and the United Kingdom. We want to inform parties of the status of the programming activities for the GBFF going beyond the time period of the draft report to the COP, which only includes information up to February 29, 2024. The first 2 selection rounds of the GBFF were carried out between February and May 2024. In total, 22 project preparation grant requests were approved for 24 countries, totaling $110 million, including 13 least developed countries and small island developing states. 35% of this funding is expected to support actions by indigenous peoples and local communities. Full projects from the first selection round will be presented for approval at or by the 2nd GBFF Council in June 2024. At the end of 2023, the GEF biodiversity portfolio included almost 500 projects under implementation with a value of $2.61 billion. Within this portfolio, 85% of the projects were rated satisfactory or higher in achieving implementation progress, and 89% were rated satisfactory or higher for progress in achieving their development objective. These are higher than the average for GEF projects as a whole. Further, 85% of multifocal area projects, which often include biodiversity resources, have been rated satisfactory or higher in achieving implementation progress, and 88% have been rated satisfactory or higher for progress in achieving their development objective. Chair, the GEF set ambitious targets for global environmental benefits for GEF 8. After 20 months, or 42% of the GEF 8 period, considerable progress has been made toward meeting the 4 targets related to conserving and sustainably using biodiversity. Expected results from approved projects and programs already exceed the full target of 100 million hectares of marine protected areas and half of the target of 150 million hectares of terrestrial protected areas created or under improved management. For sustainable use and biodiversity mainstreaming, expected results also exceed half of the GEF 8 targets, which are 195 million hectares and 70 million hectares of terrestrial and marine areas under improved practices to benefit biodiversity, respectively. In summary, the GEF has demonstrated high programming efficiency and portfolio performance, agile responsiveness to COP guidance, all backed by a resource mobilization track record. We will continue to enhance and improve our support to parties in their efforts to implement the KM-GBF. Finally, we would like to thank the CBD Secretariat for their close cooperation during the reporting period. Please allow me to reaffirm that the GEF stands ready to support you and parties towards a successful SBI-04 and COP16. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jimsky. I will now invite interventions from parties. I encourage all interventions to be focused on concrete suggestions on the draft recommendations. The statements made on behalf of regional groups may be up to 5 minutes. Statements by individual parties up to 3 minutes limit, please. I would prefer and I wish that the parties speaking on behalf of regional groups may come forward. First preference will be given to them. Thereafter, the individual parties may take the floor. I will facilitate that. Colleagues, I could see, as per my understanding, the regional groups represented by Brazil, Zimbabwe, European Union, Cook Islands. I wish to, Brazil, you have the floor. The parties speaking on behalf of the regional groups, please. I could see the name of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Zimbabwe is taking to the floor, making reference to the statement made earlier in the day by it, that is Zimbabwe on behalf of Africa, on agenda item 4. Mr. Chairman, please take note that the statement combined both agenda items, namely resource mobilization and financial mechanisms. I thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. European Union, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, distinguished delegates, colleagues. I am speaking on behalf of the EU and its member states. The Global Environment Facility has a key role to play in supporting the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Therefore, the Conference of the Parties should take the opportunity at its 16th meeting to provide strategic guidance to the GEF. The EU and its member states welcome the progress that has been made since the start of the 8th replenishment period of the GEF Trust Fund in supporting countries to meet the objectives of the CBD. Significant progress has been taking place at the portfolio level towards meeting the 4 targets related to conserving and sustainably using biodiversity set at the beginning of this replenishment period. We appreciate that the GEF, through several umbrella programs, is providing support to the development of NBSAPs and production of national reports in 139 countries, 91 countries will also be supported through a global program for the development of national biodiversity finance plans. We welcome this collaboration with UNDP's BioFin program to create sustainable finance solutions to protect biodiversity and catalyze investments in nature. Some of the available funding in GEF 8 seems to be underutilized, however. We note that the draft recommendation of the SBI reflects this and encourages eligible parties to make full use of their country allocations. The flexibility provisions across GEF phases has been increasing over time, recognizing the potential for global environmental benefits of integrated programming and supporting activities that target several focal areas. In GEF 8, a key feature is the maximum flexibility between star allocations, and we encourage eligible countries to make use of that key feature and unlock its potential. With regards to the funding needs assessment for GEF 9, the EU and its member states regret that it has not yet been conducted as planned. We invite the Budget Committee to take this issue up in its deliberations to avoid such a situation in future. We take note of the solution to remedy this situation proposed by the Secretariat, and we encourage eligible parties to respond to the survey that will be conducted by the Secretariat. Furthermore, the development of NBSAPs and national biodiversity finance plans, as supported by the GEF, will also provide valuable information in this regard. The GEF needs to continue its efforts in mobilizing additional resources. From all sources. We see room for improvement in the GEF's engagement to mobilize resources and engage with the private sector. The GEF should also continue strengthening its cooperation with multilateral development banks. These resources can support dedicated projects where biodiversity objectives are the principal focus of the activities. Mainstreaming of biodiversity targets within all its activities is equally important and also requires adequate resources. The GEF is a key instrument to support projects implementing solutions benefiting simultaneously biodiversity and other key areas, such as climate change, land degradation, chemicals and waste, and water. This includes promoting and implementing nature-based solutions as defined by UNEA Decision 5.2. The EU and its member states wish to underline the relevance of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to all biodiversity-related conventions and multilateral agreements, and support programmatic synergies among biodiversity-related conventions and with other multilateral agreements and frameworks relevant to the GBF and mandate of the GEF. For example, CMS COP14 Resolution 10.25, the revision of at COP14, calls for enhanced engagement between the Convention on Migratory Species Secretariat and the GEF. Since many CMS priorities are important elements of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, we would like SBI-04 to encourage the CBD COP at its 16th meeting to consider the elements of advice as developed by the CMS Standing Committee and reflect these considerations in its guidance to the Global Environment Facility. Another example that could be highlighted is the Global Framework on Chemicals with its target A7 on highly hazardous pesticides and the Global Alliance on Hazardous Pesticides established by ICCM5. They are both related to and relevant for Target 7 of the Kunming-Montreal GBF. Overall, the annex with the 4-year outcome-oriented framework of program priorities captures well the program priorities to be taken into account for the 9th replenishment period of the GEF Trust Fund. It includes the elements under the Convention and its protocol to which effective implementation support is to be provided. With regards to technology transfer, referenced as one of the means of implementation, EU and its member states stress that technology transfer can only take place voluntarily and on mutually agreed terms. The elements in this annex also include the plans of action adopted under the Convention to support the effective and inclusive implementation of the framework. Deliberations on the Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health are ongoing. Concluding this work at the 16th meeting of the Conference of the Parties is important, and we propose to already include a placeholder with a reference to this plan to be inserted in the elements section of this annex. At COP16, we need to provide clear and strategic guidance on how the GEF should support the objectives of the Convention, its protocols, and the Global Biodiversity Framework. The 9th replenishment of the GEF Trust Fund is a crucial step towards mobilizing additional resources to tackle biodiversity loss, climate change, and pollution globally. And we call on all governments in a position to do so to contribute to these efforts. We have further amendments to the draft recommendation, and we will send them in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, European Union. Cook Islands, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Cook Island is taking the floor on behalf of the Pacific Island countries present at this SBI-04 session, namely the Cook Islands, Fiji, Tonga, and Vanuatu. We thank the Secretariat for preparing this meeting paper 4B on financial mechanism and notes the gaps in the provisions of the guidance to the GEF with respect to the implementation of some aspects of the framework. Mr. Chair, our Pacific Island countries are tiny, debt-constrained, vulnerable, and face reporting burdens due to our limited capacities, resources, and constraints on the progress made under the implementation of various conventions we are party to. At the recent CBD Sub-Regional Pacific Island Dialogue, it was highlighted that biodiversity is a low priority for financing under budgeted in many countries, noting the debt constraints and competing budgetary priorities. On this note, we welcome the ongoing efforts of the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund and look forward to its urgent operationalization and request the Executive Secretary to review the financial mechanism to look at a standalone funding replenished triannually, similar to the multilateral fund under the Montreal Protocol, dedicated to strengthening implementation, reporting, as well as clearinghouse functions, such as accessing to and technology transfer and capacity building at the national level. This multilateral fund can serve as the anchor for ensuring an accessible and even-handed foundation of financial assistance to developing country parties and countries with economies in transition and small island developing states to support implementation of the convention and its protocols. Lastly, Mr. Chair, the Cook Islands would like to highlight that we are celebrating Biodiversity Day with the launching and recognition of the Takituma Conservation Area, a community site, as the first OECM site for the Cook Islands and the Pacific Island countries. This celebration will be live streamed tonight on the Cook Islands National Environment Service Facebook page. Be part of the plan. Happy International Biodiversity Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Cook Islands. Now, I will invite interventions from parties, individual parties. Brazil, if you want to take the floor, I wish to give it since I... Brazil, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, as Vice Minister for the Indigenous Peoples, I greet all delegates. Brazil would like to acknowledge the role that the GEF has been performing as interim financial mechanism of the Convention, even as we aspire to establish a fund that, unlike the GEF, would be under the authority of the COP and exclusively dedicated to biodiversity. We do envisage an important role for the GEF in the future. The implementation of Article 21 of the Convention will not exclude GEF from the biodiversity finance landscape. The recent establishment of the GBFF is something to be welcomed. Brazil was pleased to see how quickly the GEF was able to set it up. The information regarding the two first rounds of preparation grants already indicates some promising developments, in particular that 35% of the funding is expected to support actions by indigenous peoples and local communities. This means that, as the GBFF starts its operations, it is already overachieving, as it should, the aspirational goal of 20% set out at the GEF Council held in Brasilia. I came here to tell you why this is so important, and I will do so through the example of one of the projects that involves Brazil. Over the past years, many indigenous territories have been attacked and exploited by illegal activities, such as mining. Brazil established a de-intrusion committee, which aims to remove intruders and their criminal practices from indigenous territories. We are working with the Yanomami, Munduruku, and Kayapó peoples, among others. After the removal of intruders, we find territories that are severely damaged and in need of territorial and environmental management plans for their protection, reoccupation, and regeneration, measures necessary to protect the biodiversity it contains. These plans follow guidelines from the National Committee of National Policy for Territorial and Environmental Management of Indigenous Lands, which brings together indigenous leaders from all biomes and government representatives on all equal footing. The project, supported by the GBFF, which will count with Brazilian co-financing, is conceived in the Joint Forum and will be implemented through indigenous organizations, complementing national policies and Brazil's efforts to contribute to the global framework goals. After all, we, the indigenous peoples, are the ones who protect 80% of Mother Earth's biodiversity. At the same time, Mr. Chairman, not all is good news regarding the GEF and the GBFF. We're deeply frustrated to realize that the funding levels made available by developed countries fall immensely short of the figures contained in Target 19A. We are in disbelief that with all the attention given to biodiversity since the adoption of the GBF, only $236 million have been pledged to the GBFF. I would like to recall developed country parties of their commitment to mobilize $20 billion by 2025 and $30 billion by 2030. And I would like to recall that the world is watching. It is also frustrating that to date, the GEF Council has not been able to adopt the terms of reference for the auxiliary body and the advisory group of the GBFF. We cannot ignore, as the Secretariat did in preparing the document for this agenda item, the Decision 15/15 asked the GBFF to have its own equitable governing structure. Even though the establishment of these two bodies would not solve the obviously outdated governance of the GEF, where mega-diverse countries have to share seats, while donor countries that have almost depleted their biodiversity have seats of their own. This is simply not fair, and the lack of fairness undermines legitimacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Democratic Republic of Congo, you have the floor, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the floor. The Democratic Republic of Congo reaffirms its commitment to the declaration made by Zimbabwe on behalf of the African Group. Mr. Chairman, the financial mechanism is extremely important in terms of the implementation of the KMGBF, but also and particularly in terms of the achievement of the objectives under the Convention and its protocols. However, here we are reviewing the document, and we can note, Mr. Chairman, that there is a gap here, and this is the financing mechanism that's appropriate for the Convention on Biological Diversity. Mr. Chairman, in the documents it is to be noted that there is a fund for neutrality in terms of soil degradation. There's an instrument, a mechanism for the Green Climate Fund, and there's also a mechanism that has just been recently created, the Loss and Damage Fund. However, insofar as biodiversity is concerned, there is no similar mechanism. Therefore, we are awaiting an appropriate mechanism for biodiversity. Mr. Chairman, the GEF explained to us that they have achieved notable progress. We are in agreement with that. The GF is necessary, but not sufficient, because we refuse the fact that the convention should be someone who is limping on one foot. The convention requires 2 feet, 2 legs. The Jeff spoke about $2 billion to us, or $9 billion. That represents what in terms of the ambition of the Kunming-Morel Global Biodiversity Framework? That's $200 billion as a financial gap, and this is why member states have taken the decision that there should be a separate appropriate global financing mechanism which would allow us to bring together the necessary elements to implement the KMGBF. To conclude, Mr. Chairman, the Fund for Loss and Damages, launched 7 days ago, has been able to mobilize $7 billion. In 10 months ago, Jeff was incapable of mobilizing more than $240 million. That means that the Jeff is very below the ambition that we have for the KMGBF, and therefore we require a complementary mechanism which would be under the authority and the control of the Conference of the Parties. I thank you.
Thank you, Democratic Republic of Congo. Now I see on the screen the following parties: Canada and Cuba, Norway, Japan. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Canada is committed to the KMGBF's very ambitious biodiversity finance targets. We know that all sources of financing will be required to meet this target, in addition to domestic resource mobilization by all parties to close the $700 billion biodiversity financing gap. We have heard in interventions this week and today just how important biodiversity finance will be in supporting the implementation of the KMGBF in developing countries. In terms of international support for developing countries, Canada recognizes the important role of the GEF as the existing financial mechanism of the CBD, and we are pleased with the GEF's efforts under the biodiversity focal area in the GEF 8 replenishment and the work done to align this focal area with the KMGBF. Canada is very pleased that the new Global Biodiversity Framework Fund is now fully operational and appreciate the efforts of the GEF and all Council members in setting up the fund so quickly after COP15. We are encouraged to see 3 projects being presented in the first GBF Fund work program at the GBF Fund Council meeting in June. We are also pleased that these projects closely align with the GBF Fund's aspirational target for 20% funding for activities that support Indigenous peoples. We are also encouraged to see the recent GEF approval of 18 project preparation grants under the GBF Fund, which includes projects supporting LDCs and SIDS. Canada is proud to be the first donor of the GBF Fund, and we commend the efforts of other countries, such as the UK, Germany, Japan, Spain, and Luxembourg, who have contributed to the fund. We continue to strongly encourage all countries in a position to do so to contribute to the GBF Fund, in addition to the private sector and philanthropy. Further comments and textual changes will be made in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. The parties in queue are Cuba, Norway, Japan, Switzerland, Australia, India. Cuba, you have the floor, please.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Ante todo,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We must state that not minor number of items was concerned in the mobilization of financial resources, so the information needs to be taken into account in the reports and the recommendations made. And as far as Cuba is concerned, Jeff has been can be proud of its portfolio with many projects that have been given priority with regard to GEF. The implementing agencies have worked with them. On the basis of this experience, Cuba expresses its willingness to work in a very active form in terms of the reorientation for the 9th Replenishment Fund for GEF, and this animates its secretariat to work with the Council, however, in a direct form with the beneficiary countries as well, which are a minority. And we understand that for an adequate definition of the guidelines for the repositioning, this should be coordinated with the programming of the conclusions and the presentation of the MBSAPs, as was agreed in the CBD, because in terms of biodiversity, the principal task of the 9th replenishment is to make sure that it carries out this plan with the relevant financial resources to allow us to make an increase in terms of capacity building and knowledge transfer, as well as the distribution of relevant proportions for the 3 objectives of the CBD, which are as reflected in the GEF. As far as the GBFF is concerned, we recognize the work carried out by the Secretary of the GEF to adopt the basic rules for its operationalization, with important milestones that were achieved in 2023 in the Vancouver meeting and February 2024 in its council in Brazil, as well as the preparation of the project decision in March 2024. However, we cannot say that this is a robust success. It does not participate always in the documents that were discussed in Brazil, and it was very difficult to have the appropriate information and guarantees for the access to it by member states. The need for reform of this mechanism is very important so we can adjust to geopolitics of today. And in the issue of mobilization of resources, we're speaking about the limitations of the fund with the very low level that it currently has in terms of finances, and those developed countries that had announced their commitments before. And when we come here, we have noticed that what we'll do with the budget that cannot be carried out because of a lack of funds. And in an informative session and bilateral sessions, we would like to discuss this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Cuba. Norway, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would like to thank the Secretariat for the document and supporting information documents. Norway welcomes the progress made by the GEF in supporting the implementation of the GBF under GEF 8 and congratulates the GEF with the rapid establishment of the GBFF and the programming of resources under the fund. We note that the establishment of the GBFF has inspired a new dynamic in the GEF. We reiterate that the GEF is an instrument in constant development thanks to the systematic learning and unique opportunity to draw lessons across processes. Regarding the first recommendation to the GEF in the document, we would like to point out that the GEF has already set aside funding to support the implementation of Target 17, and Norway does not believe that a call for project proposals is necessary. Norway appreciates the 4-year outcome-oriented framework of program priorities of the CBD for the 9th replenishment period of the GEF. We would like to remind parties that the GBFF is also to support the implementation of the KM-GBF, and that this support is to be complementary to the GEF Trust Fund. We would like to request that this be reflected in recommendations from the COP towards the 9th replenishment of the GEF. Norway will send in a written submission with textual changes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Norway. Japan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Japan would like to take this opportunity to thank the CBD Secretariat for their hard work and dedication. Japan is one of the top donors for GEF 8, of which 36% is allocated to biodiversity, and has contributed $638 million US. We have also pledged 65 million yen for the GBF Fund, in addition to continuous support for Japan Biodiversity Fund, as well as COMDEX project for the Satoyama Initiative, which is one of the good examples of aiding developing countries funded by various sources, including private funds. In this regard, Japan emphasizes the importance of effective utilization of existing funds. Our specific suggestions to CBD/SBI/4/6 will be submitted in writing. We look forward to effective and constructive discussions at this SBI. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. The following the parties are in queue: Switzerland, Australia, India, Russian Federation, United Kingdom, China, Mexico. Switzerland, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. The financial mechanism, that is the GEF, including the GBFF, that has been established and become operational in record time over the past 18 months, play an important role in the implementation of the GBF, in supporting developing countries to mobilize resources from all sources for implementing the GBFF, starting with the development of their national biodiversity finance plans. Accordingly, the guidance the COP provides to the GEF is important, and Switzerland has been asking for GEF guidance from other agenda items to be included under this item. Turning to the other items under this agenda item, we welcome the 4-year outcome-oriented framework of biodiversity program priorities for the 9th replenishment of period of the GEF. We regret that little progress on the assessment of the estimated funding and investment needs over GEF 9 period has been achieved. We recognize that it is partially due to the fact that only a few parties have updated their NBSAPs and related national finance plans, and we encourage parties and the Secretariat to do their part to complete this work. Past assessments have constituted valuable input for GEF replenishments, and we trust the same will be true for the ongoing assessment. Accordingly, we do not support the proposed online regular collection of national funding and investment needs from recipient countries. In parentheses, if parties were to decide to start such monitoring of funding needs, as was done, in fact, as part of the clearinghouse mechanism under the Aichi targets, then this would have to be done for all parties of the convention, and thus be incorporated in the monitoring framework. We note the limited progress on the 6th review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism. We consider it a valuable exercise, and we encourage the Secretariat, together with the evaluator, we thank for the presentation previously, to complete this work in a timely manner. Finally, as stated at the outset, we agree it is important that the COP provides comprehensive guidance that covers all relevant goals and targets of the GBF to the GEF. The report prepared by the GEF and other GEF documents, as well as many GEF projects, demonstrate how the GEF is already addressing practically all GBF targets in some way or another. Thus, we caution against charging the Secretariat with yet another task in this direction. Switzerland will submit proposed changes to the language in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland. Australia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Australia thanks the Secretariat for its work on this item. We do also note some delays in making several key information documents available for review, and we appreciate the Executive Secretary's assurances yesterday that documents will be provided in a timely manner for future meetings. We remain concerned that several elements requested by COP15 have not been completed for this SBI meeting, including the estimate of funding and investment needs and the 6th review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism, highlighting broader concerns about the resourcing and priorities of the Secretariat. And we're particularly concerned, given that decisions taken at the upcoming COP16 will be key to informing the GEF's upcoming 9th replenishment negotiations. We note that further text is needed to bring these elements into the current draft COP decision. We appreciate the critical work of the GEF to date as the financial mechanism of the Convention in supporting the KM-GBF implementation, including the rapid work to operationalise the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. We note the GEF's ability to maximise synergies to support multiple biodiversity-related conventions and to address biodiversity loss in concert with other related environmental challenges. And we would like to see this aspect acknowledged in the draft decision. Lastly, we note that there were several references to the GEF in items discussed at Subster last week, and we propose that these be added to this item for discussion at SBI. We'll submit our specific text proposals in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. India, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. India appreciates the establishment of the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund by GEF. While appreciating the establishment of GBFF, India would like to mention that GEF should also establish an equitable and representative governance and institutional mechanism for ensuring a transparent process of sanctioning funds as per national priorities. There is a need to ensure continuous, speedy, and robust capitalization of GBFF in accordance with Decision 15/7 in order to support the developing countries in achieving the KM-GBF targets. Further, for augmenting the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, additional sources may be explored from other Rio Conventions and other biodiversity-related conventions and civil society organizations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. Russian Federation, you have the floor, please.
Спасибо, господин председатель.
Thank you, Chair. The Russian Federation, of course, recognizes the important role played by the Global Environment Fund in terms of financing and work linked to biodiversity and all of its pragmatic and useful work in a number of countries. However, at the same time, it's difficult to accept some of the parts of the preambular paragraphs in the draft recommendation, noting, welcoming the resources from the GEF for the global framework when we haven't yet had access to these resources, so we wouldn't welcome with satisfaction. The decision-making process of the GEF needs to be completely reformed according to Article 21 of the Convention, and the entire governance system of the Convention also should be reviewed. The current system is not satisfactory. It's not fair at present. We've already said that under these conditions we will have difficulties in considering GEF as an appropriate financing mechanism. We've already talked about this at the Convention with regards to our links to the GEF and links of GEF with a number of countries. I think that should be mentioned in draft recommendation, so I would suggest a new preambular paragraph in draft recommendation on this. We also note the concern of a number of countries on the distribution of allocated resources by the executive or the executing agencies of the GEF who are financing projects. We'd like to underline that funds made available to the implementing agency are resources belonging to countries and not to the agency itself. They are just tasked with managing these funds. All of our comments and proposed amendments will also be sent in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Russian Federation. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, colleagues. The United Kingdom would like to recognise and congratulate the Global Environment Facility for their work and their efforts in developing and establishing the new Global Biodiversity Framework Fund in record time. As we've heard today, only 18 months after the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, the GBF Fund Council will approve the first work programme of projects. This is fantastic news, and the UK is proud to be one of the first donors to that fund through our initial contribution of $12.5 million US. Chair, we support the guidance issued to the GEF on the next 4-year replenishment cycle, which will provide a comprehensive set of GEF funding to cover all 23 targets of the KMGBF. Specifically, and recognising that the GEF is the financial mechanism for the Nagoya and Cartagena protocols, the UK supports the call for financial support to be taken up by recipient countries to deliver on targets 13 and 17. We also welcome that the proposed recommendation and the associated report of the Secretariat highlights the extent to which the GEF, as the financial mechanism of the Convention, is under the guidance and authority of the Conference of the Parties. Parties set the direction of GEF programming on biodiversity and provide a consolidated list of programme priorities that defines what should be financed, and the GEF is required to report back to parties upon that progress. The next quadrennial framework must reflect recipient countries' national biodiversity strategies and action plans and other relevant national planning instruments. And so for the next replenishment cycle to be most effective and to achieve expected outcomes, we urge countries to outline their financing priorities to guide this GEF programming. We have further comments that we will submit in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Indonesia, you have the floor, please.
No, we don't have any comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Indonesia. China, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. The financial mechanism is the foundation of resource mobilization. China thanks the Secretary and SBI Chair for preparing the thorough information, which laid a good foundation for further discussions. China commands the rapid launch of the GBFF. We hope that more donors, including the private sector and financial institutions, could contribute so that it can provide more financing channels for developing countries and contribute to Target 19. China notes the exchanges during the intersessional period on the financial mechanism to support the KMGBF. We welcome this and hope that all parties will stay pragmatic in discussions. As the official financial mechanism of the CBD, GEF plays a role that is difficult to replace in a short time. To achieve the funding targets, we need to significantly increase the funding in the biodiversity area in GEF 9 over GEF 8. We also hope that GEF could follow the party-driven principle to support work aspired by parties according to their national needs. We hope the procedure should be simplified to improve access, efficiency of implementing agencies, and cooperation with the private sector and civil society. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China. Mexico, you have the floor, please.
Gracias, Thank you, Chair. Mexico welcomes the report on the activities conducted by the Global Environment Facility Fund for the implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity, in line with the principles of transparency and accountability. in this regard. We would also launch a call for the GEF Fund to continue carrying out actions necessary to support parties which are developing parties and countries with economies in transition, to ensure that this financing is accessible, directly accessible for indigenous peoples, women and the youth, in order to implement the goals of the Convention, its protocols and the Global Biodiversity Framework. We also welcome the design, establishment and operationalization of the Global Biodiversity Fund under the aegis of the GEF, and the selection of the first projects, which will hopefully be approved in next June at the meeting of the GEF Council. Nevertheless, despite the above, we note with great concern that resources committed by developed countries to support the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework through contributions to the recently established fund have not fully been paid. Therefore, we call on developed countries to meet their commitments and to significantly increase their contributions to the fund. We will send our amendment proposals in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mexico. The parties in queue are Fiji and New Zealand. Fiji, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fiji has delivered its intervention on agenda item 4A, resource mobilization, and 4B, financial mechanism, when we took the floor in earlier agenda items. However, we wish to reiterate just one key position once again. But first, we align to earlier intervention from Cook Islands on behalf of Pacific Islands present here today at the SBI-04, that includes Cook Islands, Tonga, Vanuatu, and Fiji, and that we welcome the revised strategy of resource mobilization in Annex 1 of document CBD-SBI-04/5, and the need for an ambitious and action-oriented resource mobilization strategy that is operationalized and adequately resourced. Chair, the full text submission from Fiji is uploaded in the SBI-04 site. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiji. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand joins other parties in congratulating the GEF Secretariat on the swift establishment of the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund and on implementing simplified application and approval procedures. We congratulate donors who have already contributed to the new fund, and we were pleased to hear that in recent days the GBFF approved 18 new projects in 21 countries, including 13 LDCs and SIDS, including Pacific SIDS. It will be important to build on this positive momentum. We welcome the GBFF's 25% programming through IFIs and MDBs, the aspirational share of 20% to Indigenous peoples and local communities, and especially the 36+3% to LDCs and SIDS, which we consider will assist these countries, including in the Pacific, to access much needed funding for biodiversity projects. Like Brazil, New Zealand was pleased to see that 35% of approved funding to date is expected to support action by Indigenous peoples and local communities. New Zealand welcomes the proposal for a draft outcome-oriented framework of program priorities for GEF 9, including the approach to addressing gaps to align with the KMGBF's targets and to align with other biodiversity MEAs. New Zealand also welcomes the GEF Council's preliminary report on GEF activities during the period 2022 to 2024. We congratulate the GEF on achieving a significant co-financing ratio of $6.9 being leveraged for each GEF dollar during the first 20 months of GEF 8. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Friends, I see Argentina, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Chair, Argentina would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the documents provided. and the Global Environment Fund for preparing the preliminary report for the consideration of the SBI. The preliminary report from the Council of GEF clearly shows that there's a large gap between committed resources and needs for the implementation by developing parties. Many of the statements made on the agenda item on resource mobilization have shown the need for greater commitments by developed countries to achieve the quantitative targets included in Target 19 of the Global Framework. In this regard, we hope that negotiations for the natural replenishment of the fund will result in contributions from donor countries which are commensurable with the ambition of the Global Framework. In addition, we also hope for an increase in the level of contributions in the fund for the Global Biodiversity Fund. Argentina expresses its concern with the lack of voluntary contributions for the 6th assessment of the review, which resulted in the use of resources from the regular budget to ensure that the assessment could be carried out with a limited scope for consideration at COP16. Argentina believes it's essential to have guidance to the global environment facilities approved by parties in order to implement the global framework. We have additions to the text which we'll send in writing in line with the provisions of the Convention, its global framework, and governance instruments of the Global Environment Facility and the Global Biodiversity Fund. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Argentina. I see no more requests from parties for the floor. And now I invite interventions from other governments. No response, please. I now invite interventions from observer organizations. Statements will be limited to 3 minutes. If any organization is speaking on behalf of a stakeholder group, kindly say so at the beginning of your intervention. Again, I request that statements be focused on concrete suggestions. I will offer parties the opportunity to support proposals made by observers. IPLCs, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. We acknowledge the recent development in GEF policies, including 20% aspiration programming under the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund to support indigenous peoples and local communities. In line with this, we call for the strengthening of the GBFF as well as other biodiversity financial mechanisms through partnership with indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, in their design and delivery, recognizing the challenges in accessing funding that have been highlighted for many years. The GBF Fund and other financial mechanisms seeking to support the implementation of the KMGBF should adopt transformative and new governance arrangements, policies, and procedures which maximize the amount of funding reaching the indigenous peoples and local communities women, and youth, and give agency to these right holders to decide how these funds are managed and through which intermediary agencies. An inclusive mechanism means recognizing the diverse capacities of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, and considering all geographical regions and ecosystems. Furthermore, we propose to include the review of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, in the 6th review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanisms and in succeeding reviews. We propose the following text. For agenda item 4B, in document CBD-SBI-04/6, under the Global Environmental Facility Trust Fund, at the end of para 6, we propose to add, including through dedicated support to indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, after framework. Under the section on Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, we propose to add a new para 10B, which will read, acknowledging the aspirational programming share of 20% by 2030 from the total amount of resources allocated under the GBFF to support actions by indigenous peoples and local communities, and urges the GEF to design its delivery of the 20% in consultation and partnership with indigenous peoples and local communities. Under section further guidance to the Global Environmental Facility, we propose to include invites the GEF to support partnership with indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, and to recognize and promote their contributions to the implementation of the targets of the KMGBF. And we also would like to remind the COP decision 14/15 para 6 that recognizes the voluntary guidelines and safeguards in biodiversity financing mechanism. And a review of the effectiveness of the financial mechanism, after the word mechanism, we propose to include in para 19, including views from indigenous peoples and local communities. We have submitted our specific proposals in writing. We request parties for your support. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, IPLCs. Now I offer an opportunity to the parties. If they support, please raise the hands. Colombia, Bahamas, Australia, Bangladesh, Democratic Republic of Congo, I think Philippines, Peru, if I am correct. Yeah, thank you. Pardon? Brazil, yeah. Zimbabwe, am I correct? Yeah, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Women, please. Women's Caucus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I am speaking on behalf of the CBD Women Caucus, as stated in paragraph 40 of Information 18. GEF 9 will be the final and last opportunity of providing financial support under the financial mechanism to recipient countries for implementing the GBF. And considering that GEF 9, pragmatic directions are yet to be agreed upon and will be determined based on the funding needs identified by parties, we highly recommend that the questionnaire regarding funding needs be developed in synergy among national focal points to the CBD and the GEF. Even more, those priorities should be defined and decided with full, equitable, inclusive, effective, and gender-responsive representation and participation of indigenous people, local communities, women, and youth. This inclusive approach will ensure that the diverse needs and perspectives are taken into account, facilitating the identification of collective priorities and needs. Additionally, it is imperative to urgently transform all the details that are provided in the documents below. Therefore, regarding documents CBD, item number 6, we suggest the following edits, which we would like the chair to ask parties to support. First, in paragraph 9, to add the words goals and sections in line 3 of the paragraph, at the end of the paragraph to add and as well as section C. The second one, in the section of the conference of the parties, the relevance in recognizing the integrated and indivisible nature of the components of the framework, which include considerations of its implementation, section C, implementation and support mechanisms and enabling conditions, section 1, and responsibility and transparency, section J. Lastly, to delete explore ways to further improve at the Annex 4 year outcome-oriented framework of program priorities of the Convention on Biological Diversity for the 19th replenishment period of the Global Environment Facility Trust Fund of 2026-2030. And instead add ensure, and also at section 12C, establish simplified application processes, capacity building initiatives, and dedicated funding streams for parties to support the full and effective representation and participation of indigenous peoples, local communities, women and youth in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Regarding document CBD information 16, Annex questionnaire for the assessment of biodiversity funding needs during the 19th replenishment period of the Global Environment Facility. We request to include references on how the process ensured the full, equitable, inclusive, effective, and gender-responsive representation and participation of indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Women Caucus. I now offer parties the opportunity to support the Chile, yeah.
Any others?
DRC. Then, what is it? Peru? Peru? Is, yeah, thank you.
Chile, DRC, okay, that's it.
Cameroon? Cameroon?
Okay.
Comoros.
And
Colombia.
Okay, that's closing.
Bangladesh. Thank you. The last one is youth, please. Youth, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We welcome the Global Environment Facility's first response to the CBD COP15 request to establish the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, as well as the effort to include the participation of the indigenous peoples, local communities, women, youth as observers. However, we are concerned that some of the targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework are being better addressed than others, both at the Global Environment Facility Trust Funds and the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund. The fact that all the Global Environment Facility resources are allocated in a country-driven manner means that there is still a lack for right holders' accessibility and inclusivity. We highlight that the way grassroots organizations, including indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth-led organizations can more directly access resources still need to be further explored and developed. We also call attention to the lack of support for Target 22, Target 23, and Section C. In particular, there are insufficient efforts to support plans and actions focusing on full and effective participation in decision-making, accessible financial resources, and enhancing the role of collective actions, including by indigenous peoples and local communities. Therefore, we recommend the following. On the draft recommendations for the Conference of the Parties, in paragraph 13, add after the word framework, as well as considerations for its implementations, section C. Add a new paragraph, 18b's, that read, invites the Global Environment Facility to explore ways to further improve, facilitate access to, and increase funding for indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. At the annex, paragraph 12b, add at the end of the sentence, as well as for activities and initiatives of women and youth that enhance biodiversity. We kindly ask the parties to support this intervention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Youth, GYBN. I now offer the parties opportunity to support, if any. No, Mexico, Costa Rica, Zimbabwe, Comoros, Uruguay, am I correct? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. No. Dominican Republic, thank you. Friends, we have now reached the conclusion of our discussions on item 4B on the financial mechanism. We have had a very rich discussion and very good suggestions. Thank you. With the help of the Secretariat, I will prepare a CRP and will bring it for consideration to a later plenary session. However, if there are any contentious issues if we find in writing, then we will see what best we can do. So friends, with this, I conclude the discussions on 4B. Thank you. Distinguished delegates, we will now take up agenda item 5. This item has two sub-items. Sub-item A on capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, clearinghouse mechanism, and knowledge management. And sub-item B on capacity building and development action plan for the Nagoya Protocol. We will take up the two sub-items separately. Now, I request the Secretariat to introduce the documents related to agenda item 5A on capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation, and technology transfer, and clearinghouse mechanism and knowledge management. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. In Decision 15.8, the Conference of the Parties adopted a long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development, and also developed a mechanism comprising of a network of regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation centers to be coordinated by a global coordination entity. The COP requested the Executive Secretary, with the advice of the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation, and in consultation with the Bureau of the Conference of the Parties, to implement a process for selecting entities and organizations to host the regional and or sub-regional support centers to promote and facilitate technical and scientific cooperation. The COP also decided that modalities for the operationalization of the global coordination entity be developed by the subsidiary body for consideration by the Conference of the Parties at its 16th meeting. In addition, the Conference of the Parties requested the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation to prepare recommendations on how to monitor progress against the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development and the mechanism to strengthen technical and scientific cooperation. Furthermore, in Decision 15.16, the Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary to further develop, with the support of the Informal Advisory Group, a draft knowledge management component of the framework at the time, which has since been changed into a knowledge management strategy. The document was prepared with the support of the Informal Advisory Group and was submitted for peer review by parties and by the open-ended working group on Article 8J before it was presented here. Finally, the COP requested the Executive Secretary to prepare, in collaboration with the Informal Advisory Group, a proposal for an updated work program for the clearinghouse mechanism. To assist the subsidiary body in its deliberations on the above items, the Executive Secretary has prepared document CBD-SBI-04/7, which comprises the following sections. Section 2 provides an update on the actions taken to operationalize the technical and scientific operation mechanism, including the process for the selection of organizations and entities and organizations to host the regional and or sub-regional support centers, and the development of draft modalities for operationalization of the global coordination entity, which is presented in the annex to the document. Section 3 contains draft elements of possible indicators proposed by the Informal Advisory Group on how to monitor the long-term strategic framework for capacity building and development, and also how to monitor the technical and scientific operation mechanism. Section 4 introduces the updated work program for the clearinghouse mechanism for the period 2024 to 2030, which is presented in document SBI-4/7/4/7 add 1, while section 5 in document SBI-4/7 introduces the knowledge management strategy to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework contained in document SBI-4/7/add 2. Section 6 of the document reports on the work undertaken so far by the Informal Advisory Group on technical and scientific operation. And the last section, Section 7, presents for your consideration draft recommendations on this whole item. In addition, the Secretariat has prepared for your information the following documents. Information document SBI-4-INF7 on possible modalities for operationalizing the global coordination entity. Document SBI-4-INF8 containing a compilation of submissions that were received from the peer review of the draft knowledge management strategy. And finally, information document SBI-4/INF9, which presents a draft indicative work plan for the implementation of the knowledge management strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now invite the co-chairs of the Informal Advisory Group on Technical Scientific Cooperation to present their report to the subsidiary body. I understand that the report will be presented by Mr. Motohiro Hasegawa of Japan. Mr. Hasegawa, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of my co-chair, Ms. Paulette Bynum of Guyana, I am honored to present a report on the crucial work undertaken by the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation. As you may recall, the establishment of the Informal Advisory Group, IAG, was a significant step taken by COP15. The IAG was tasked with providing strategic advice to the Executive Secretary and relevant bodies under the Convention and its protocols. Its mission is to promote, facilitate, technical and scientific cooperation, technology transfer, capacity development, knowledge management, and the clearinghouse mechanism. All of this, of course, is in support of the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The IAG is composed of 33 members, including 19 nominated by parties and 14 nominated by various stakeholders. Two co-chairs of the consortium scientific partners on biodiversity also participated as ex officio members. Mr. Chair, since its inception, the IAG has been diligently working towards its objectives. It has held 3 meetings, the first in person from 14 to 16 June last year, the second online from 1 to 2 November last year, the third in person from 19 to 21 February this year. The records of these meetings are available on Secretariat's website. And its first meeting, IAG developed a comprehensive rolling work plan for 2023 to 2024 and adopted operational procedures and modalities to guide its work. Furthermore, to facilitate its work, the IAG established 4 subcommittees on, number 1, capacity building and development, number 2, technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer, 3, knowledge management, and 4, the clearinghouse mechanism. Those subcommittees held various virtual meetings and online discussion forums to address specific issues. Mr. Chair, distinguished delegates, please allow me to give you a summary of the key tasks undertaken by the IAG and the outputs delivered during the intersessional periods. First, as mentioned by COP15 in Decisions 15/8, the IAG supported the process of selecting entities and organizations to host the regional and/or sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers. The Technical and Scientific Cooperation Subcommittee provided advice to the Secretariat on the development of the Expression of Interest form and the framework for evaluating the applications received. Subsequently, the entire IAG reviewed the evaluation report prepared by the Secretariat, which presented the scores of all the 42 entities and organizations that expressed interest in hosting a regional and/or sub-regional support center. The IAG provided advice on the cutoff points for entities and organizations to proceed to the second stage. During the second stage, the IAG provided advice on the assessment framework and reviewed the draft assessment report prepared by the Secretariat, which provided a ranked short list of entities and organizations per region and sub-region on the basis of the Secretariat's draft report and considering other factors in addition to absolute scores, including geographic coverage, language, and others. The IAG prepared an assessment report providing advice on the most suitable entities and organizations by region, the number of centers required, and the 3 possible scenarios, and other key considerations. Parties were invited to submit views of the IAG's report through notification 2024-028. The Secretariat compiled and submitted the views received together with the assessment report to the COP Bureau to assist in the final selection of the most suitable entities and organizations. The COP Bureau is expected to make a final decision on the selection of the regional and sub-regional support centers in the coming days. Secondly, the IAG made an analysis and provided advice on various elements of the proposed modalities for the operationalizations of the global coordination entity, which are presented in the annex of document CBD-SBI-04/7 before you. Third, the IAG also discussed the possible indicators and the process for monitoring process in implementing Target 20 of the framework the long-term strategic framework on capacity building and development, and the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism. A set of proposed indicators is presented in paragraph 24 of the document CBD-SBI-04/7 for consideration of this plenary. The IAG also prepared and submitted to the ad hoc technical expert group on indicators a set of binary indicators for target 20, and later provided additional advice on the binary questions, the proposed glossary of key terms, and the complementary indicators for target 20 of the framework, which were presented in document CBD /Substa/26/2/1 and considered by Substa 26 last week. Furthermore, the IAG reviewed and provided advice on the draft knowledge management strategy to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The IAG first reviewed the draft knowledge management strategy and recommended a streamlined version to the 12th meeting of the ad hoc open-ended intersessional working group on Article 8J and related provisions of the convention held in November 2023, last year, with particular attention to traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and local communities. Subsequently, parties, indigenous peoples, and local communities and relevant organizations were invited to peer review the revised knowledge management strategy through notification 2024-010. Finally, the IAG reviewed and provided advice on the draft program of work on the clearinghouse mechanism for 2024-2030, which has been made available for your consideration during this plenary today. We hope the work carried out by the IAG and the advice provided will facilitate your deliberations this week. In conclusion, I would like to thank all the members of the advisory group for their expert advice and for their commitment, dedication, and hard work. My co-chair and I look forward to continuing to work with you all to support the effective implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hasegawa. I will now open the floor. I encourage you to keep your statements concise and focused on concrete suggestions on the draft recommendation. Although I do recognize that there are multiple elements to this item and its draft recommendation, I ask you to try to keep within time limits, please. I encourage parties speaking on behalf of the regional group to request the floor early. Statements made on behalf of regional groups may be up to 5 minutes. Statements by individual parties, 3 minutes, please. I now invite the parties speaking on behalf of the regional groups. European Union, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The EU and its member states would like to stress the importance of the means of implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to ensure that parties can implement the framework. In the section on capacity building and development, we have some minor changes and additions that we will submit in writing. In the section on technical and scientific cooperation, the EU and its member states support the draft decision with several changes and additional paragraphs. We look forward to the decision by the COP Bureau on the establishment of the regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers, and expect the Bureau to take into account the views and preferences previously expressed by parties and regions in this regard. These centers will be important to assist parties in capacity building and development. The EU and its member states propose to add reference to the Global Knowledge Support Services for Biodiversity in several paragraphs, taking into account the role that the global support services could play in supporting the implementation of the framework. In some paragraphs, the regional and sub-regional centers are asked to report to the Secretariat. According to the modalities in the annex, it should be to the global coordination entity. We are in favor to adopt the modalities annexed to the draft decision. However, depending on the final decision during COP on the global coordination entity, we look forward to discuss the modalities here during SBI-04. We would like to put paragraph 8 in brackets for now and invite the co-chair to give some more information which we just heard, and we'd like to thank him. We are in favor that the Secretariat will be the global coordination entity. However, it could be supported by external technical capacity by the Global Knowledge Support Services for Biodiversity. We propose to add a paragraph in the SBI recommendation that asks the Secretariat to prepare for the budget discussions during COP60 a budget divided between core and voluntary budget for a smaller team than in the INF document. We propose to bracket paragraph 10 and move it to the budget discussions. We also propose to bracket the GEF paragraphs for now, till we are sure that the GEF can support the centers, and it should be discussed under the agenda item 4B on the GEF. The EU and its member states are of the opinion that the indicators should be added to the online reporting tool under SBI-04 agenda item 3, taking into account also reporting the commitments for the non-state actors. Paragraph 19a, b and d should be bracketed for now till the modalities and the global coordination entity are decided upon. We propose in little c a small change from mobilize into facilitate the mobilization of. We propose also to add a paragraph to collect capacity building requests in other COP decisions and to communicate these requests to the support centers. In the section on the clearinghouse mechanism, the EU and its member states would like to welcome the work program of the clearinghouse mechanism. We have some minor changes in several paragraphs which we will hand in writing. We propose to add a paragraph to encourage parties to nominate or to update information on their CHM national focal point. In the section on knowledge management, taking into account the importance of the knowledge management strategy and the extensive consultation with parties, the informal advisory group, and the working group on AJ, we would like to adopt the strategy with some minor changes in the draft recommendations. However, there are two frameworks mentioned in the draft recommendation. We would like to ask the Secretariat to make it clear which framework we are referring to. We would like to make some minor changes in this section. We would like to make a reference to INF documents 15 and 16 from substat 26 after the word targets on paragraph 7b, in the understanding that the references will be updated towards COP with the correct reference to an ad or another type of document. We will hand in our comments in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, European Union. Egypt, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Africa Group, Egypt is honored to address item 5A. Africa believes that capacity building and development are pivotal to achieving the objective of the Convention on Biological Diversity and its protocol. Africa, rich in biodiversity yet facing significant challenges, recognizes that robust capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation are essential to conserve and sustainably use our biological resources. Africa is committed to strengthening our technical and scientific capability, including for technology assessment. We emphasize the importance of inclusive and equitable partnership, where knowledge and technology transfer are facilitated in a manner that respects the need and contribution of all parties. We call for increased support for initiatives that enhance the capacity of local communities and indigenous people, recognizing their critical role in biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. Africa welcomes the assessment and selection of regional and/or sub-regional technical and scientific support center. We endorse the selected center. However, we think that we should extend the mandate of the informal advisory group and identify suitable solutions for perceived gap on experience for some targets, especially on the two protocols, and geographical distribution of the centers through inclusion of additional center, ensuring that there is a balance of focus among the center of excellence on all the objectives of the convention and its protocol. Africa's preference on global entity would be the Secretariat, but we would want a clear way forward on how it would address its limitation and potential conflict of interest to meet the criteria set out in the modalities. Africa believes that the clearinghouse mechanism is a vital tool for knowledge management, facilitating the exchange of information, experience, and best practice. Africa advocates for enhanced functionality and accessibility of the clearinghouse mechanism, ensuring it serves as an effective platform for capacity building, fostering scientific collaboration and disseminating knowledge critical to our collective effort. Africa acknowledges with appreciation the Global Biosafety Clearinghouse Project Phase 3 and call for UNEP to elaborate on a global project to provide capacity building on using the clearinghouses of the CBD and its protocol, noting that they have been harmonized, and to establish national node for clearinghouses using the BioLine tool, and guide the exchange of information and cooperation among parties in the implementation of the information sharing obligation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Egypt. Cuba, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cuba makes this statement on behalf of GRULAC. We take note of the work done by the Informal Advisory Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation, and we extend appreciation and gratitude of their work in providing the recommendation contained in document CBD-SBI-04, SBI-7. We note the tremendous effort to ensure that we are making strides toward the achievement of the Target 20 of the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We are of the view that the draft recommendation provides a very good basis for our discussion in the coming days, in which we hope to provide further direction to enhance the manner in which capacity building and development should be executed. Based on their needs, effective capacity building, technical and scientific cooperation, and technological transfer are crucial for developing countries for the balanced implementation of the common Montreal Biodiversity Framework. These elements empower developing nations to effectively manage, conserve, and use biodiversity in a sustainable way by enhancing their technical expertise, scientific knowledge, and technological capability. Support through financial resources and international cooperation will help address the unique challenges our country faces, enabling us to fulfill the KMGBF goals and targets, promote sustainable use of biodiversity, and ensure fair and equitable benefit sharing from use of genetic resources, as well as from the use of its digital sequence information. Ultimately, this effort fosters global biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. While developing countries have been innovative in their endeavors to implement their respective MBSAPs, this has proven very difficult due to the need for more and more immediate support to do so. It is vital for all countries to have capacity to meet global biodiversity targets in order to contribute to the conservation and sustainable use of our resources. We welcome any effort made by the Secretariat to forge partnership with the entities and organizations highlighted by the IAG selected to host regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers. GRULA also takes this time to stress the importance of the recommendation made by the IAG to fast-track the mobilization of resources from potential donors to enable the entities and organizations who are tasked with hosting regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation support centers to deliver support to parties to implement the KMGBF, in particular developing countries. We must emphasize that without adequate resources, developing countries will continue to be at a disadvantage in the implementation of the MBSAPs. Our country have long been the homes of critical biodiversity and ecosystem, which support all life on this planet. We take this time to underscore the sentiments by the Jamaica on behalf of GRULA under item 4 related to resource mobilization and the financial mechanism. We stress that while developing countries has always been innovative, the time has come for us to be armed with adequate tools, knowledge, science, and technology in order to support our innovation toward conserving and protecting our biodiversity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cuba. I would like to know whether Switzerland and Korea are speaking on behalf of any regional groups, please. If so, please raise hands.
Switzerland said no, so
No.
I'm not sure. I guess Korea wasn't, so just go to parties.
Yeah,
starting with
okay.
Morocco.
Now, we will, the floor will be open to individual parties, please. Yeah. Morocco, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Morocco aligns itself with the statements made by Egypt on behalf of the African Group. On the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, Morocco encourages acceleration of the process to operationalize the entities and organizations selected without losing any time in order to host the regional and sub-regional centers to support technical and scientific cooperation and to mobilize financial resources necessary to ensure they're effective. Chair, the strategic framework for capacity building and development is one of the elements which is the most important for the implementation of the global biodiversity framework alongside resource mobilization. Its implementation requires an effective monitoring mechanism. That's why Morocco welcomes the elements of the indicators set out by the Advisory Informal Group on Technical and Scientific Cooperation and proposes adding a paragraph to the draft decision on this point, which would read as follows. Well, we will send it in writing, rather. On the clearinghouse mechanism, Morocco is in favour of all the elements included in the draft recommendation in document CBD-Live 7. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Morocco. The parties are in parties that are in queue are Malawi, Russian Federation, Republic of Korea, Zimbabwe, United Kingdom. Russian Federation, you have the floor, please.
Спасибо, господин председатель.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. First and foremost, please allow me to indicate that this document, in the section on scientific and technical cooperation, and the accompanying annex raise a lot of questions. It seems that there are some elements which run contrary to logic. First of all, we're talking about regional and sub-regional centres. It's just 2 days ago that we received information on these centres. It's therefore difficult for us to speak about them now, given that they're not really set out in detail anywhere. Now, given the decision from the previous COP, the 2-year plan for these centres does not seem reasonable and can really apply to 2025, 2026. We also can't fully agree with point 8 because we don't know what they're going to set out as a global centre. There's no real detail on that. I think we have to come back to this at COP16 when we've had more information on this. The same thing on section 10. How can we approve a budget without really knowing the details of it? And we need to resolve the issue of financing and budgets for resources. Now, there's also a recommendation for the advisory group to continue its work. But what composition will it have? What mandate will it have? There's no true decision on the continuation of that work. On point 19, there's a proposal for the Executive Secretary to already recruit staff when we haven't yet decided that the Secretariat would host this global centre. So all of these paragraphs, as other sections, should be placed in brackets. We could adopt the programme of work for the next period with a few amendments, and for the knowledge exchange programme, we will send, of course, all of our statements in writing. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Malawi, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi would like to support the statement that was made by Egypt on behalf of Africa, and we welcome the report of the work of the Informal Advisory Group, including the assessment of regional and/or sub-regional technical and scientific support centers. On the draft recommendations, Malawi looks forward to the finalization on selection of the entities and organizations to host the regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation centers. We also see the urgent need to fast-track signing the host agreements and allowing mobilization of resources to enable the entities to embark on delivering the support that is required to parties in a timely manner so that they are useful in the supporting of the implementation of the framework within the time frame of the framework. Chair, on the global coordination entity, we see that there is need to support the implementation. It is needed in order to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, and we are already in the second year of implementation. Considering the time limitations and the need for familiarity with processes under the Convention and its protocols, our preference would be to designate the Secretariat as the global coordination entity, with the understanding that limitations that exist within the Secretariat would be improved, including potential supplementary budget to cover cooperation costs, as this is needed to allow effective delivery of the tasks required within the timing of the framework. We realize the potential limitations that could be faced by these entities in covering all the targets of the framework, and hence we welcome paragraph 18 of the draft recommendation for an independent evaluation on the relevance and effectiveness of the mechanism. With regards to the clearinghouse mechanism, Malawi commits to making use of the central portal of the clearinghouse mechanism, and we look forward to version 2.0 of the Byland 2 as we continue to take necessary steps to strengthen our national clearinghouse. We therefore welcome the program of work of the clearinghouse and request support for developing parties to implement the work program of the clearinghouse. We have made specific recommendations on the actual paragraphs in text that we'll submit in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. Republic of Korea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The Republic of Korea would like to thank the Informal Advisory Group and Secretary for all their work. Technical and scientific cooperation, as emphasized in Article 18 of the Convention, is one of the keys to the successful implementation of the Convention. The Republic of Korea, as a presidency of COP12, recognized the importance of having the dedicated program on technical and scientific cooperation, and proposed the establishment of the BioBridge initiative. The BBI facilitates cooperation between parties in need and parties to assist them. It has facilitated and supported 55 projects over the last 10 years, of which we are very proud. As the only program under the Convention that solely focused on the promoting and facilitating technical and scientific cooperation, the importance of the BBI was highlighted at COP15 and recognized as an interim solution to fill the gap until the global coordination entity on technical and scientific cooperation is established. In order to strengthen the function and service of the initiative, Korea has also provided a senior level officer to the Secretary to help with the work. In this regard, we support the recommendation of the Informal Advisory Group to invite the BBI to continue to provide support until the global coordination entity is in place. Setting up the functioning global mechanism for technical and scientific cooperation is the challenging task and might need a long process. In the meantime, Korea will continue our support for the BBI so that its experience will fit into the operation of the global coordination entity and help accelerate the global implementation of the GBF. Thank you.
Thank you, Republic of Korea. The parties in queue are Zimbabwe, UK, Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Switzerland, Japan. Zimbabwe, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Zimbabwe supports the statement made by Egypt on behalf of Africa. Zimbabwe acknowledges the importance of capacity building and development in achieving the objectives of the Convention on Biological Diversity and its protocols, and is encouraged by the efforts being made towards this endeavor. Zimbabwe notes with great appreciation the work of the Informal Advisory Group on technical and scientific cooperation in supporting the activities of the Secretariat on capacity building and welcomes their reports and recommendations. Zimbabwe supports the establishment of regional and sub-regional technical and scientific cooperation centers to support parties in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Zimbabwe looks forward to making use of these support centers to further strengthen our capacity. Mr. Chair, Zimbabwe notes with concern the limited time between now and 2030. While we note the BioBridge initiative and the attempt to provide support in the interim, we are concerned about the limited capitalization of the initiative, which has rendered it ineffective in achieving its intended impact. Zimbabwe therefore invites all stakeholders to be cognizant of the need for timely finalization of the operational modalities and procedures of the global coordination entity, and is optimistic that the facilitation of this process will be concluded soon. And in this regard, we would like to state or indicate our preference for Secretariat as the said entity. Zimbabwe also welcomes the establishment of the knowledge management strategy and requests continued support in strengthening our capacity in the generation, management, use, and sharing of data, which is crucial in implementation of our NBSAPs. Zimbabwe expresses its gratitude to partner agencies such as the Food and Agricultural Organization, Africa Union Commission, and Africa Union Development Agency, New Partnership for Africa's Development, who have provided continued support for capacity building and development activities to enable the comprehensive implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework at national level. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Zimbabwe. United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The UK would like to thank the Secretariat for their work to date on this agenda item, as well as the work of the Informal Advisory Group, and we welcome the progress made to establish the sub-regional technical and scientific support centres, which will provide vital support to parties for implementing the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Robust global coordination will be required to support the centres, and we look forward to further discussions regarding the global coordination entity. The UK notes the recommendation of the IAG regarding the host of the global entity, and that the draft recommendation does not currently reflect the options available to us. But we note too that there are multiple considerations and moving parts to take account of. So, the UK suggests focusing our efforts at this meeting on the modalities for the global entity in the Annex, as this would help parties, and indeed the Secretariat, better reflect the budget, staffing, and activities required of the entity, and help us make the decision of the host at COP16. The UK would also like to see a process for providing guidance to the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, which could be approved by parties to guide the work planning and programming of the sub-regional centres and the global entity. The UK will submit comments in writing to cover these issues, as well as minor comments on the Clearinghouse Mechanism work programme and the knowledge management strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, United Kingdom. Argentina, you have the floor.
Gracias. Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates. First of all, Argentina allies itself with the statements made by Cuba on behalf of GRULAC. Argentina reiterates that capacity building, scientific and technical cooperation, and technology transfer are essential for achieving the targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. On the draft decision, Argentina has 5 observations. First, on capacity building, and Argentina supports, in general, this section. We need to continue implementing the strategy approved at COP15 to achieve the goals of the global framework. Second, on technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer. We need to discuss Annex 1 on the global coordination entity, in particular its budgetary implications and its financing with assessed contributions. We would like to see budget proposals if possible. We believe that the entity should focus on closing capacity gaps in terms of science, technology, and innovation in developing countries, and support the activities requested by the parties. In addition, we believe that it should report to the SBI. Third, on the clearinghouse mechanism and knowledge management. Argentina has some proposed amendments to the draft decision and to the Add 1 and Add 2 documents. where we propose that the clearinghouse mechanism and the knowledge management strategy be compatible with national and international regulations on the data sovereignty and exchange. We also consider excessive the many actions suggested to parties and believe that developing countries should have flexibility for implementation, guaranteed with adequate and predictable means of implementation. In addition, we would ask for clarifications on the specific actions expected from key players. It's not clear if they have the capacity or the skills to carry out all of these. Fourth, on the knowledge management strategy. We believe that knowledge is key to inform policies which are based on science to implement the global framework. Nevertheless, we have concerns on the current document, in particular when it comes to singling out of technologies such as artificial intelligence, whose contribution to biodiversity has still not been discussed at SUBSTA. In addition, we would ask for clarifications on the knowledge which the strategy proposes sharing. Could this include digital sequencing information on genetic resources, DSI? Chair, Argentina reiterates its commitment to taking part in a constructive manner, and we have sent our proposed amendments in writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Argentina. Next, Brazil, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Brazil aligns itself with the statement delivered by Cuba on behalf of GRULAC. On our national capacity, we add that we appreciate the work done by the IAG in analyzing modalities for technical and scientific cooperation, capacity building, and supporting an updated framework for the clearinghouse mechanism. We welcome the indicators proposed by the IAG for monitoring progress, which we understand could enhance the implementation of Articles 16, 17, 18, and 19 of the Convention. We are of the view that the network of regional and/or sub-regional technical and scientific operations support centers may play an important role in improving our activities in this area and welcome the work done in the selection process. We believe there is an opportunity for those centers to attract financing from a variety of sources, and for that reason are concerned about the possibility of making them eligible to receive financing from existing multilateral funds as the GEF. For Brazil, financing from multilateral funds must prioritize national efforts according to current eligibility rules. On the global cooperation entity, we concur that a structure must be set in place to coordinate the technical and scientific cooperation. It should facilitate the identification of science, technology, and innovation capability gaps by developing country parties in a transparent and inclusive manner, taking into account different regional perspectives, and should facilitate, on a demand-driven basis, technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer among parties, especially from developed country parties to developing country parties, to support implementation of the Convention and of the KM-GBF, including through joint research programs and joint ventures for the development of technologies relevant to the objectives of the Convention. We would caution, however, against a heavy structure with significant budgetary implications. We also would like to further inquire about the options to host the new mechanism. In case these results too cumbersome for the Secretariat of the Convention, we could consider alternatives such as UNEP. It would certainly meet all the criteria currently defined in the modalities for its operationalization and would be well placed to tackle this issue from the point of view of synergies. As for the draft knowledge management strategy, we should ensure that it is applied to address the specific challenges faced by developing countries and the importance of achieving greater equity in biodiversity data generation and collection capabilities, prevent the misuse of traditional knowledge associated with genetic resources, and ensure consistency with relevant international obligations. We sent that statement and other observations in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Canada sees this agenda item as a key building block to support the implementation of the KMGBF. As we transition to the implementation phase, we recognize that better coordination is needed to support effective capacity building and technical and scientific cooperation efforts. We are encouraged by the progress made to establish the network of support center and wish to thank the Secretariat and the advisory group for their excellent work on the selection process. We do, however, have some questions regarding the global coordination entity. We understand that the informal advisory group assessed two options for the global coordination entity. However, the analysis contained in information document 7 was published late. As such, we believe that additional information from the advisory group would be very useful to better understand what were the main considerations that led to the recommendation on this matter. We are very mindful of timing. Ensuring that we set up a global coordination entity as soon as possible to support the implementation of the KMGBF is top of mind. However, we believe that we need to make an informed decision on this issue to ensure efficient and cost-effective delivery of scientific and technical cooperation activity. As mentioned by other delegations during this meeting, the Secretariat has a heavy workload. From our perspective, it'll be very important to have a clear understanding of the resources needed for the Secretariat to undertake this role if we decide to go with this option. This discussion should occur as part of the agenda item on administrative and budgetary matters, where all the resource requirements will be assessed. In advance of this discussion, we would like to request the Secretariat to prepare a detailed financial estimate of the resources required for the operationalization of the global coordination entity, including scalable options. We know that the KMGBF has generated a lot of interest and that many initiatives were developed to support its implementation. We're keen to find solutions to ensure that duplication of effort is avoided. It is paramount that we maximize existing initiatives. On the work of the clearinghouse mechanism, on the work program of the clearinghouse mechanism, we're generally supportive. Should time and resources permit, we believe that an analysis of the previous work program would be beneficial to make an informed decision at COP16. Finally, regarding the knowledge management component, given that the document has undergone multiple robust reviews, including at Working Group on HJ12, we're eager to see the document adopted at COP16. Chair, these are in very broad strokes some of the reflection that we have on this agenda item. We hope to have more fulsome discussion during this meeting with a view to enhance technical and scientific cooperation to support the implementation of the KMGBF. We'll share additional text suggestion in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. Distinguished delegates, all we have time today, and I thank you for your active participation, suggestions made during your interventions. Today, this is time for, we have to adjourn. I hereby adjourn the meeting. Tomorrow, we will assemble here again for taking up this agenda item. Other parties in queue will participate with their interventions, please. I hereby adjourn the House. Thank you very much for your cooperation and understanding. Thank you.